right, so thank you everyone for being here. If you can't make it, here's the recording and you're probably watching later. But we have Allison Watkins here. She is the horticulture agent in San Angelo, and she's here to talk to you guys about Earthkind roses. So you can take it away.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I grew up in Texas. I've been here in San Angelo for 12 years now, and I really like West Texas. Y'all are a little bit further west than me, but I really like it out here. And I'm not a rosarian by any means. I'm not an expert rosarian, but I do love Earthkind. So Earthkind is my biggest focus that I like to teach and promote. And that's a very wide, very large thing. And so Jeanette said she taught y'all about that in the last one, those of you who attended that. So I'm just going to briefly mention what Earthkind is, just a couple of slides. You may have seen this specific exact slide already. It's landscaping that focuses on protecting our environment and conserving our natural resources. And so in doing that, we also still have beautiful, functional, very useful, very enjoyable landscapes and gardens. And the main areas that we focus on to achieve that, it's conserving water, designing our landscapes to conserve energy, and then reducing fertilizer and pesticide use, and reducing not filling up our landfills so much with yard waste. And I kind of focus on these 9 principles for anywhere from starting with planting and all the way through rainwater harvesting and rain gardens. There's a lot that can go into Earthkind landscaping, and you can have hours and hours of lessons on each of these, but we're just going to focus on the roses today. So why did Earthkind, so roses are kind of the foundation of Earthkind, and why is that? So they're kind of our flagship plant. They were the first research effort with the Earthkind landscaping system. And so they started with a goal to identify and promote adapted roses, tested under low input conditions. This is scientific, it's randomized, replicated, multi-year scientific research to achieve this. They tested them under low input conditions, just meaning they didn't get very good care and they were kind of put through the ringer with regional climate and climatic and pest pressure. So given basic plant care, people would have a high likelihood of being successful growing these proven roses. Now, roses have kind of a reputation. Some of you may know that some roses are very easy to grow, but in general, roses have this reputation for being really hard to grow, and they're very popular. They're beautiful plants. It's hard to find someone who just hates roses. They're just pretty. Maybe there might be someone who doesn't like to grow them because they've had a bad experience and the roses didn't do well and they were sickly plants or died, but it's hard to find someone who just hates the roses. They're pretty. And so they're popular, but they have this reputation for being hard to grow because some do require a lot of pesticides, fungicides particularly, and they can be really finicky, some types. So that was kind of why they were chosen as this flagship plant, to show people if we find the right roses and you grow them in an Earthkind way, you can be very successful. So the rose trials was a really good foundation framework to use. And it's something that we try to promote that people do on a regional basis, and that you can have Earthkind rose trials or Earthkind plant trials of any kind. I'm also doing an Earthkind perennial trial here in San Angelo. It's just a good model to follow to help promote this Earthkind system where we test plants. We try to take a scientific approach to choosing what plants we test, and then test them in a randomized, replicated, scientific manner, multi-year. And then we can select the plants that do really well without inputs, no pesticides, no fertilizers, and then we can promote those to the communities as Earthkind plants to help protect the environment and help people enjoy gardening more. So there's a great website. The Earthkind website has a lot of all of the overall Earthkind information, but there's also a specific Earthkind roses section of the Earthkind website. So you can just Google Earthkind roses, or you can type in the link, and you can see different information, more details about how they're selected, and you can see pictures and information for each specific rose cultivar. And I'll go through each of these, but just to show you, here are some of the varieties that have been designated as Earthkind roses. And we'll go back to that and we'll look at each one of those. So a little bit more about what went into making the decisions on what's an Earthkind rose. So promising roses are identified just by, sorry, there's a little bit of an echo on me.
Yeah, I think someone needs to mute. Let me see. I'll mute everyone and then just unmute yourself, Allison.
Okay. Alrighty, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Alrighty. So so I forgot to mention, so Dr. Steve George, he's one of our horticulture specialists with the Extension Service. He's a landscape extension specialist with up in the Dallas location, and he's the one who kind of spearheaded all of this. His wife Brenda came up with the name Earthkind, and so this was all it's grown exponentially throughout A&M and through the Extension Service, and with all other fields being involved, and entomology and IPM and water conservation and all of that. But it kind of started with Dr. George, and excuse me. So promising roses are identified just using experience and talking to other extension staff and nursery industry and those who grow roses. They just selected a whole bunch of rose varieties to try, and they're planted, like I said, in a randomized, replicated scientific manner, and they're cared for using cultural practices identified by Earthkind landscape management. So we're conserving water. They did get watered in the original plant trials. The roses were watered, but watered less than an average homeowner would water. No pesticides. And then data was collected every month. So this is a 4-year project. The first year the plants were planted and they were just given time to establish. Then the next 3 years, years 2, 3, and 4, monthly data was collected on each individual plant. Things like flower coverage, what percentage of this plant is covered in blooms. Each plant was given a rating for foliage, how healthy did the leaves look, did it have any pests, drought stress, things like that, nutrient deficiencies. So the plants that performed well, they were planted in smaller conformational trials. Just the ones that were promising were replanted just to try it all again and make sure they really were what they thought they were, and that they were as good as they thought they were, for several more years. And that's how they chose these specifically designated Earthkind roses. So they're beautiful plants, they're fun to grow, they're easier to grow. These are not, brand new roses that A&M has invented. A lot of them are old-fashioned varieties, some of them are newer. They're not, so A&M isn't creating Earthkind roses or breeding them. A&M has just done research to test various roses. And then the ones that do well, they label it with this name, or this is an Earthkind rose because this rose did really well in our trials. This is a national Earthkind trial at Farmers Branch. Can you imagine taking data every day on all these plants? That's a lot of work. So this is a national Earthkind trial rose garden. It's beautiful to go visit if you're ever in the Farmers Branch area. I've been there a couple times. And so it's just gorgeous to walk through. And it's really, Earthkind is something that a lot of people really like to get behind. Municipalities and schools and just different entities are often happy to partner and excited to get involved in this. And so it's really helpful to reach out to other agencies and things like that to work on partnerships and just like it says, pool your resources. The Earthkind Rose Trials were, the results were published in scientific journals. This is Hort Technology. This is Hort Science. And also in the Nursery Trade magazines. So the term is really out there and a lot in the public and becoming more and more popular. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my rose trial here in San Angelo. Did anyone have any questions, or Jeanette, did you want to wait till the end for questions, or how did you want to do it?
If anyone has any questions, this is probably a good point if they want to ask any before you move on.
Just real quick, I noticed it. One of the things was no deadheading. That was surprising.
Yeah, so part of the trial is you just don't do anything. You just don't care for the rose. So yeah, that I'm glad you brought that up, because part of it is they just wanted to find roses that an average person could plant and enjoy and not have to do anything to. So yeah, there's no pruning, there's no deadheading even. Some roses do really well at reflowering on their own, and that is part of not only the plants that could survive the less water, the no pesticides, but also the ones that just performed really well and are beautiful with just really no inputs at all. So yeah, that's a good point. Not even deadheading.
It's almost like Mother Nature knows better than we do.
Right? Who'd have thought? All right, so let me just tell you a little bit about the Earthkind Rose Trial we did here in San Angelo. In 2011, I worked with the City Parks Department, and they gave me some land in one of our parks, and we kind of made a partnership. They provided the water source, but and also the Master Gardeners. My Concho Valley Master Gardeners here were huge supporters of this. They provided the funding to purchase the roses and the drip irrigation and the mulch. So the city gave us the ground, and they helped us with some labor, but the Master Gardeners really supported this project and gave the money for the plants, the irrigation, and the mulch. The city came by. You can see that tractor. That was a huge blessing. They had an auger to dig all these holes. The ground out here is really hard. I'm sure it is over where you are too. But this was 80 plants. We selected 20 cultivars, repeated 4 times in a random way, and so 20 cultivars repeated 4 times, 80 roses, and the city brought their tractor. I marked out where every plant would go, every hole needed to be dug. The city dug the holes with their augers. The Master Gardeners helped by scraping the holes to just loosen them up. The auger creates a really hard walled hole, and the roots won't grow through it very well, so we had to scrape the holes and loosen it up. They planted, and then I watered them in. Always water new things in by hand. Even if you have a fancy irrigation system, always water new plants in by hand. And then a local horticultural supply has a mulch blower, or they had one. I don't know if they still do, but they brought their mulch blower, and that was just magical to a lot of people. They're like, wow, that is so cool. I had never used one before. But it sure beat hauling mulch with wheelbarrows. We purchased a semi-trailer load full of mulch. I can't remember how many yards it was. I think it's 75 yards. I think it's 75 yards. That was a full semi load dumped there. And so they scooped the mulch up into the mulch blower, and we blew it into the beds. And when I show this picture, I always get jokes about why are you vacuuming up the dirt outside? But it's going the other way. It's blowing out, not being vacuumed. So we have all these little bitty plants, 80 roses. We did 4 nice broad curved rows, and each row has all 20 roses in it, but they're randomized in a different order in each row. So mulching is really, mulching and weeding is the only care. Mulching, weeding, and drip irrigation. We laid down drip irrigation before we put the mulch down. So they were watered, but not very much. They were only watered a few times a year after the first year to establish. We helped them establish by giving them more frequent water in the beginning. All new plants always need more frequent irrigation at first to get a root system developed. But years 2 to 4, they were only watered a few times a year. We just replenished the mulch and pulled the weeds. And it's always nice to have master gardeners or friends that have really handy tools like a bobcat to help spread more mulch. And so here's what the plants looked like in 2013. And then in 14, we had some volunteers from the local university. Like I said, EarthKind just really is a good way to bring different people together. Lots of different groups are willing to volunteer and help out. Always spraying more mulch. And then this is what they looked like in 2015. Just beautiful, beautiful plants. And so they never had any pesticides. They had no fertilizer. We never pruned them or deadheaded them, except for one time I was out there collecting data, and a man and a woman were at the park, and he asked if he could pick one for his girl. And so I let him pick a couple of roses. But other than that, no pruning, other than whatever random people visiting the park thought they would want to go pick. We didn't even improve the soil. We didn't even till up the soil and put compost in, which is, the normal EarthKind recommendation. Very little irrigation, just mulch and weed control. So I should have put in a picture of what the data form looks like, but there's a full sheet of a data collection form, a full sheet of paper for each individual rows that has to be filled out. And it was enjoyable to take the data, but also it was kind of a big commitment because I had to go out once a month and fill out a full sheet of paper on all 80 roses. Things like how many flowers are on this plant. So as you can see, counting those flowers, it's nice that there's so many flowers, but yeah, counting was fun. And then estimating percent coverage, how much color is there over the green, estimating rating on disease pressure and nutrient deficiency and things like that. So that was done for 3 years. And this specific EarthKind Rose project was done in cooperation with Dr. David Zlezak. He's a professor with the University of Wisconsin, and he's a rosarian, he's a rose breeder, and he really loves EarthKind. And so this was done in cooperation with him. And he hasn't written the paper yet that was going to be published. And now at this point, I'm not sure if he is. He was going to write a paper for a scientific journal. I'm not sure if he still is now. So we don't have the official published official statistics and data, but from my own observations, here are the ones that I liked. And these rose cultivars, these are all from a specific rose breeder out of Germany called Cordes. These were chosen because this rose breeder, Cordes Roses in Germany, they stopped using pesticides for their breeding stock for developing new roses. When we chose these, they hadn't used them for 15 years, and now it's been over 20 years. So they hadn't used any pesticides for their breeding stock for 15 years. And so we figured that this would be a good pool to pull from all the breeding stock for these new varieties. These were all new varieties. We thought it would be promising to not need a lot of pesticides because they hadn't used pesticides, to choose their breeding stock, their breeding lines. Before I show you all the ones I like, the biggest problem with this trial that was a huge disappointment is that rose varieties come and go so fast, and it's really hard to buy these roses. So if you ever see them for sale somewhere, let me know. I have been able to see where to order some of them online, but they're not all just readily available. And that's the disappointing part, because the whole point of these Earthkind trials is to help show other people in the community what they can grow. And if they can't get it, it doesn't do any good. So for my perennial trial, we just finished up a perennial trial, and we're going to continue it in a more informal way. We're going to keep going, but for that, we really focused on only choosing plants that are obtainable, that you can get easily in the nursery industry. So this Milano Colorscape has beautiful, vibrant, deep flowers. The foliage was always really healthy and beautiful. Lupo is just covered in flowers. It doesn't have very many petals, but there's so many flowers that it's very showy. Pompanilla Fairy Tale was one of my personal favorites. The roses have a real rounded, kind of a carnation look to them. It just looks beautiful. This Innocencia vigorosa, this was the absolute healthiest looking plant. This plant never had yellow leaves. It never had black spot. It never had anything ugly on it. It just always looked beautiful. And the flowers, again, there's not a ton of petals, but it is a beautiful, healthy, nice, bright white flower. And then this Raspberry vigorosa, again, these are all Cordes roses. This one was always covered, just absolutely covered in these beautiful raspberry colored flowers. So does anyone have any questions on that trial or any of those rose cultivars? So let's just talk about the statewide Earthkind roses. These roses are considered Earthkind roses all over the state. My trial was more of a regional trial. What does well out here in West Texas? And again, that's something that we like to encourage people to do. If you live somewhere, wherever you live, you can try an Earthkind trial and test out which ones do the best for your climate. But these on the Earthkind website are designated statewide. And so let's just look through a few. Oh, and I'm sorry, before I forget, that Earthkind trial with Dr. Zlezak, mine here in San Angelo, he got invited to speak at the International Rose Societies Convention in Lyon, France, and he let me go with him to speak, and that was a once in a lifetime experience for me. So I got to go to Lyon, France, and talk about my little rose trial and this international convention. So that was a really neat experience. Like I said, everyone seems to like to get behind Earthkind, and it's really is a good way of bringing people together with common goals. All right, so these statewide Earthkind roses, we're gonna kind of go in order from smallest to largest. So Marie Daly is considered a found rose. It was, they don't know the origins of it. They found it and named it. It's about 3 feet tall and wide. It's nice and fragrant. It's a really pale pink, and the petals are semi-double. So double flowering, if you don't know what that means, a single flower is just a single row of petals all the way around. And double flowering isn't necessarily exactly double, it just means many more petals. There's not just one single row. Like if you picture a daisy, like if you can picture a daisy in your mind, there's a single row of petals around the center of the flower, that's a single flower. But a double rose has many more petals. And so semi-double, it means it's more than a single flower, but it's not as full as some of the others, like Belinda's Dream. I'll show you. It's an extremely double flower. And so repeat blooming, that is without the deadheading, meaning it will repeat bloom on its own pretty well without having to do anything for it. It doesn't have very many thorns. It does have some, but not a ton. And it does really well in large containers. So if you have a nice big planter, it'll be really pretty in that. The fairy, this is a little bit bigger, a little bit wider. It's a very double. The flower is small, but it has many petals. It repeats blooms very well. It just gets absolutely covered in lots of small flowers. Caldwell Pink is about 4 feet by 4 feet, and it's a very double flower. It has kind of a carnation look to it, and it blooms just wonderfully all through the summer. And then we have Pearl D'Or. This is an old-fashioned rose, about 4 feet tall and wide. It's very fragrant, kind of a very light pale peach color. It repeat blooms very well, and it's just always flowering. And it's a really popular old-fashioned rose. So getting a little bit bigger, this is Belinda's Dream. Belinda's Dream is a very, very double flower. This flower has lots and lots of petals. And it's about 5 feet tall and wide when it's mature, nice pink color. So according to the slide, if you only plant one rose in your entire life, Belinda's Dream is a good one to go with. It's a fun one to grow. It blooms really well, it smells nice, the flowers are just gorgeous, and these are pretty large flowers. I don't really have anything to show the scale, but like the one before, the fairy, where I said that it has small flowers, but there's a lot of them, Belinda's Dream has a lot of flowers, but they're very large. So like you could, fill the palm of your hand with one of these flowers. It's just very big. So Carefree Beauty is a buck rose. Dr. Griffith Buck worked for the university in Ames, Iowa, and he was a rose breeder. And I got to go meet his wife and daughters when I first started. Dr. George was working with them, and we took a little road trip up to Iowa to research the buck roses. And this is one of his most popular roses that's still used a lot. It's about 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide. It's a nice fragrant rose. It's really tough. Carefree Beauty is one that we use as a control. A control in a research trial is something that you already know what to expect. So we already know that Carefree Beauty is an easy to grow rose that stays really healthy. The name Carefree Beauty really says a lot. And so if you do a plant trial, it's important to have controls in there. So we use Carefree Beauty as a control in my research, and we also use a negative control in my project. A negative control is something that that we knew didn't perform really well. I can't remember what our negative control was. It was one of the purple. Can't remember. It was a purple rose. So we used Carefree Beauty as a positive control because we knew it did really well, and our negative control we knew was a pretty poorly adapted cultivar. And so if our negative control did really well, then we knew that the conditions weren't really that challenging for the trial plants. And then our positive control is just a good thing to compare to, like how well is the control doing? If something is wrong with it, then we know it's kind of an extreme circumstance for the whole trial. And then the next one is Elsa Poulsen, about 5 feet tall and wide. Another pink one. It has a really nice floral impact. It's just absolutely covered in flowers. It does need really good air circulation. I'm going to talk about how to plant and where to plant roses in general, but this one does need good airflow. You can't crowd it around other plants. So Knockout, it's not an old-fashioned rose. It came out in 2000. This is highly used in the nursery industry, nursery and landscape industry. And this is about 6 feet tall, 5 feet wide, semi-double, not a ton of petals, but more than single. It repeat blooms really well. It has Great disease tolerance for black spot, but not for rose rosette. I don't know if y'all are familiar with rose rosette, but it's a virus that has been affecting roses in the DFW area. I don't know if y'all have had any rose rosette in your area. We have not in San Angelo, to my knowledge. I do know there have been a couple of confirmed cases in Abilene of rose rosette, but again, that's a virus that is spread through an insect vector. Well, not technically an insect, it's a mite. A mite is an arachnid, not an insect. So it's spread through this very tiny, very small mite that blows through the wind and carries the virus with it. And knockout roses are very susceptible to rose rosette, and it has killed a lot of them in the DFW area. But again, we haven't seen it extensively out here out west. Knock on wood, we don't. So it has great disease tolerance for black spot. I believe the way that this particular plant was, the way it came to be was, I think his name was Radler, Bill Radler was the one who developed this rose. He had his breeding stock in his greenhouse, all these different breeding lines that he was crossing and trying to come up with new cultivars. He collected all of the strains of black spot that he could find, and he made this slurry of black spot disease, and he just inoculated all of his breeding stock to see what would survive. And so knockout wasn't fazed at all by his attempt to infect it with black spot. And so he took that and ran with it to release this particular plant. So black spot really doesn't affect it much. And most roses really need full sun, but it can handle a little bit of shade. So Mutabilis is a really fun rose. It's about 6 feet tall and wide, so we're getting larger and need to have enough room for it. But the flower kind of changes color. It opens up in a pale, kind of a yellow color, then it turns pink, and then the third day it'll turn kind of a crimson color and fall off. So this is a single flower. It doesn't have many petals. It's just a single row of 5 petals, but it repeat blooms really well. And when the plant is just covered in flowers at different stages, there'll be different colors on the plant. And so it's really great for kids' gardens because you can tell them to go pick a rose, maybe tie a string around it and go track the color change from day to day. And it also has a nickname, the butterfly rose. So now we're getting into some climbers. So climbing pinky, up to about 10 feet tall, 6 feet wide, a nice fragrant flower. Climbing roses, they work a little differently than your shrub roses. Climbing roses will have a massive spring bloom. Now, as Dr. George likes to say, they will bloom as much as a shrub rose, but they'll do it all at once. So when you have a shrub rose that's blooming all through the season, a climbing rose will bloom as much as they do, but they just do it all at once, and they're just covered in flowers for a period in the springtime, and they don't really rebloom very well. So they do have a little bit of a fall display of color, but the limited spring bloom is what you really want it for. Climbing pinky doesn't have many thorns, and you can train it over an arbor and be really nice. Seafoam, this is a white climbing rose, good repeat bloomer. This one is really neat to kind of cascade downwards. It does climb, but you can also use it in a big planter or in a retaining wall, and you can have it trail outward and down and kind of cascade out. It's really pretty that way too. All right, so growing tips. Now, the whole point of these earth-kind roses is that they're easy to grow, but even earth-kind roses need the right environment. And so here's some growing tips. The main thing is full sun, good airflow, and don't spray them down with water at night. So even earth-kind roses, they need room to breathe. You want to have good airflow over all of those leaves. So don't crowd them around each other. Don't crowd them in with other plants. Make sure that their leaves aren't touching other plants when they get to be full grown. So have the good airflow, give it direct sunlight. If you want flowers, you have to have sun. So bright, direct sun for 8 hours or more every day. And if you have sprinklers, make sure the sprinklers are not hitting them when it's dark. Roses are best watered just at the soil with drip irrigation, not with sprinklers spraying on the leaves. So roses also, they really respond well to well-drained soils. Incorporating compost is really beneficial. This picture here is a rose garden of one of my master gardeners, Ron Knight. He has since moved from this particular house, so the new lucky owner gets to enjoy this rose garden. But he dug up the soil, he tilled it all up really well, he incorporated the compost, and he planted these roses. If you have clay soil, heavy clay soil is challenging. When your soil is really sticky when it's wet, cracks really wide when it's dry, it's just kind of miserable to work with. And if it makes you miserable trying to dig in it, it's really going to make your plants unhappy too. And so compost will really help with clay soils, but expanded shale is the very best thing to do for heavy, sticky clay soils. Expanded shale it's like a rock. They run it through these industrial ovens. It pops like popcorn, and it's just these little dark gray rocks that are just full of air. They're really light and porous and full of air. And so you can incorporate, till up your ground and incorporate expanded shale and your compost, and then crowning your bed. That just means when you're adding in this compost and expanded shale, it is going to raise the grade a little bit. So crown the bed, make it higher in the center, and that helps with drainage also. And so that's gonna help you a lot, and that's really helpful for any of your gardening, whatever you're trying to grow. If you're really miserable with sticky heavy clay soil with no drainage, expanded shale can help with any of that. It is a little bit more expensive. It is more expensive than compost, but it's a fairly permanent change. It doesn't just break down or go away. It'll just be there for the future. So that's another view of his rose garden where he dug up, and we do have heavy clay soil, and he didn't incorporate the expanded shale. He just did the the compost, and that did help, even just that. So then last thing is mulch, 3 to 4 inches deep of organic material. Again, this is going to be great advice for almost anything that you're growing. It's just good earth kind soil management and plant care, but it's really helpful to the roses. It helps keep the water in. It helps, so it's good for water conservation because the water isn't evaporating so much. It helps protect roots from extreme temperatures, keeps the weeds out. And so just put a 3 to 4 inch deep layer of organic mulch on the soil surface. And as that organic mulch just breaks down over time, if those of you who have used mulch a lot, eventually it just starts to disappear. And that's a really good thing. It's good to see your mulch disappear because that means that it's breaking down and decomposing into compost, into humus. That is really good for your plants. So Dr. George likes to say the phrase, compost once, mulch forever. When you plant something new, incorporate the compost, then plant, then mulch, and just keep replenishing your mulch forever. You don't have to scrape away the old mulch. You don't have to till in the old mulch. You just leave it be, and you just add more on top to replenish it to that 3 to 4 inches deep layer. So we don't call compost or mulch a fertilizer technically, but we do know that they contain nutrients. And so that's a really good part of earth kind soil management, is utilizing organic matter from compost and mulch to keep our soils nourished, to keep our plants healthy with the nutrients that they need. When you are incorporating compost, make sure that it's finished compost. Don't incorporate raw organic matter that's not decomposed into your beds where you want to plant. because then it can take away nutrients. It'll rob your plants of nitrogen because that still has to break down. But once it's finished breaking down and it has turned into finished compost, then it provides nutrients. Let's see. So yeah, once they're established, again, for these trials, we always give them a year to establish, where we do give them a bit more water. You water more frequently because they don't have a big root system yet, and they just have to have a little bit more help to get established. But once they're well established, these earth-kind roses are very drought tolerant. They're very heat tolerant. We only water when the soil dries out. Like I said, my trials, my perennial trial and my rose trial, were just watered a few times a year once they were established. Too much water is actually bad, and especially when you have clay soil, it can be easy to do. Killing too often will damage the plants and can even kill them. Oh, and I forgot to mention with the mulch, it is good. You do want to pull the mulch away from the stem a couple of inches from any woody plant. Mulch is great, but kind of pull it away from the trunk. Don't pile it around the stem of the plant like a volcano. Just pull it away from the stem a couple of inches. Otherwise, there's the potential for that it could cause a little bit of rotting on the stem or cause problems. But yeah, also don't water too often. Most likely you'll need to water every couple of weeks or so once they're well established, especially if you have mulch on the ground. Drip irrigation is always best for most situations. For my personal preference and what I do in my landscape is I do still use spray irrigation for my turf grass, but I use efficient multi-string nozzles for my turf, and everything else is just drip irrigation for the vegetables, drip irrigation for the flowers, drip irrigation for the shrubs. Drip irrigation is more water conserving. You don't lose water to evaporation, especially if it's under mulch. Then you've got a double whammy for water conservation. And so it's better for water conservation, and it's also healthier for the plants. If you're spraying water, salty water spraying on leaves constantly can cause leaf burn. And so it's good for the plants and it's good for your water bill as well. All right, so I think that's all the slides I had. Did anyone else have any questions or anything you wanted to talk about more casually?
I have a quick question.
Uh-huh.
Is decomposed granite similar to that expanded shape?
So they're not very similar, no. Decomposed granite is very solid. You can get various sizes, but let me see if I can stop sharing, and then can y'all see me now?
Yes.
So yes, so decomposed granite, you can get various sizes, but whatever size it is, it's very solid. It's massive. It just has a high mass. The expanded shale also comes in various sizes, but it's always very airy. It's like volcano rock. It's just full of holes, and so it can really aerate the soil.
Thanks.
Uh-huh.
I just want to comment that I had earth-kind roses for 16 years. I put in a row of 5 of them in that little useless 5-foot strip along the driveway where nothing will grow, and I have no irrigation to them at all. I do prune them annually. I thought you had to prune them annually. I take them back to a little less than knee high, and they seem to come back like gangbusters every year.
Yeah, you certainly can. Pruning doesn't hurt them at all. Yeah, that's really good to hear that they do well for you.
And on low rainfall years, they'll be maybe 3 to 4 feet tall. On high rainfall years, they'll be 5 to 6 feet tall.
That's awesome. Good to hear.
Wow.
Alrighty, what other questions did y'all have or comments that you would like to make or discuss?
Allison, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. This is Jerry Green.
Hi, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Again, you gave me some new information. That's what I needed. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all for getting on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna just share the schedule. If y'all didn't know, we had my class, now Allison's class. The next class is on March 24th. We're gonna be talking about herbs with Barbara Porsche. If anyone's interested, you can go back to that website where you registered before. I just wanted to give everyone a little reminder. But if there's no more questions, you are free to go. And thank you so much to Allison for a very great, informative presentation.
Thank you.
Dr. Ashley.
Learned a